Chapter 1251, Second Edition. The Rebornian dwarves were more than happy to start the production process for the phones. All this while they'd been practicing and honing their new abilities. Michael held a Unity power source in his hands made by one of the dwarves, and he couldn't help but be impressed. It didn't lack in quality compared to what he could do, in fact, it was even better. Somehow they were able to optimize the battery so that it would be thinner and smaller, despite giving a better performance. Michael couldn't believe it, and not only that, but they came back to him with a lot of proposals about how to improve the phone. He took all of their considerations and was proud of what they'd done. Now they were ready to produce the second version of the phone. This time, instead of a metal brick, it would now become more like a metal plate. The screen would be bigger, the keyboard would be stockier, more tactile and easier to touch, and of course, it would be a lot more comfortable to hold in the hand. Michael could have definitely improved the phone so that it would be fully touchscreen. However, that was way too complicated. It would take too much time to produce, not only through the ingredients needed to make them but also the process in which to combine them. It would need a totally new production factory, and their factory workers would need a few weeks of training just to understand what they're doing. In short, it wouldn't be feasible to do them right now. As it stood, both he and Cassell agreed that it would be much better to mass-produce the phones so that it could get into the hands of more people. They were trying to replicate the success of the automobiles. Their cars weren't the most optimized pieces of engineering when they came out, but people still bought it. The novelty of the car itself was what sold the item. And because of that, they could now create more variants of cars. They were even creating luxury and supercars now, sold only to their VIPs. Michael was planning to do that with the phone as well. Once more and more people knew what a smartphone was, then Michael would start to introduce more and more complicated pieces of technology. Perhaps once the upper echelons had their hands on the phones, Michael would start to produce the fully touchscreen smartphone to his nation. But now, it was just better to get the phone out there in the hands of people. And so, Kong and the engineers worked day and night to finish the phone factory. Then, using their new employees, they increased production on their minerals, their silicons, their steels, and among other things needed to produce the phone. Now they won't have to slow down production of their other products to start producing the phones. Meanwhile, Caliburn and the other Lionhearts found themselves traveling back towards the north. Now this was a rush. They hurried here so fast that they left Arthur and the other younger Lionhearts back in the nation of Reborn. After all, this conversation was serious. They would be talking with the big shots of the Oscorp conglomerate. Right now, they were at the very lip of the chasm. The island containing New Sparta stood in the horizon like a looming territory separated from the world itself. Caliburn led his family towards a camp filled with soldiers. The banner of the Oscorp hung on every tower, making sure to deter anyone who dared to offend them. "Why are they here, Patriarch? Why have they set up a checkpoint here in the chasm, and why did they summon us so quickly?" Caliburn turned silent. "From what I heard, they seem to be hunting a rogue family member of theirs, Earl." It was at this point that his other soldiers nodded. "They're finally finishing him off, huh? Has the succession really been that serious?" "Yes," Caliburn nodded. "Earl was supposed to be out of the succession, yet he was able to win against one of his brothers despite having the weaker army. Of course his other brothers are taking this seriously. They might be next." They continued onwards, towards the largest tent in the camp. And there they saw a woman sitting in her throne. Caliburn kneeled in front of this woman. "Trilla, greetings," he said. The woman named Trilla Oscorp nodded at Caliburn and the other Lionhearts, giving them respect. But she didn't get up from her seat. It was clear which of them were the more important party. "Ah, you're here," Trilla said. "I assume you have come from the parched lands. Were the rumors true? Is there truly a paradise in the desert?" Caliburn couldn't help but think back to the nation of Reborn. Yes, it is a true paradise. It is peaceful and progressive. Their technologies are something to behold. Trilla nodded. "Yes, well, I don't care much about what happens in the south. What I care about is the succession. Have you heard about what happened to my little brother?" Caliburn shook his head. My scouts saw him plunging into the chasm, hopping to avoid me. I have no doubt he's already dead." This truly shook Caliburn to say such cold things about her brother. It seemed that the succession of the Oscorps were truly a cold-blooded war. "What did you summon me for?" "Well, we talked about the Reborn Company, did we not? Have they acceded to our request?" "They requested for Reborn to not help Earl." We learned that they did not help Earl. It looked like they were fighting against each other too." This made Trilla nod in satisfaction. "Well, I heard that it's them that allowed my little brother to win his battles. I wonder what kind of technology they have in store. Have you asked them about my request?" Caliburn shook his head. Their conversation hadn't led to that yet. Trilla wanted the phones for herself too, bought of course. Chapter 1252, Blue Mankey Project. If Caliburn were going to be honest, he didn't used to think much of the Reborn Company. Yes, they had good technology, but they simply didn't have that powerful of an army to supplement their business acumen. At least, that's what he thought. He did see that there were some good magnetics during that baseball game, but that wasn't enough for him to change his mind. In his opinion, martial arts and warriors was still the way to go. He'd heard that it was thanks to the Reborn Company's strange technology that allowed Earl to win against one of his siblings, so there were a lot of rumors going on around it. And like most, Trilla also wanted to get her hands on this magnificent smartphone. But Caliburn and the rest of the Lionhearts were on the opposite side. They didn't believe that technology was the key to winning the succession. They believed that a good old-fashioned army could overcome any kind of advantage that technology could bring. That was proven by the fact that Earl still lost. And when Caliburn and the Lionhearts toured around the nation of Reborn, he'd seen glimpses of this strange technology. They called it the phone, a revolutionary piece of device that allowed people to communicate with each other and other such things. But he saw that despite what it was advertised, this phone didn't promote communication at all. He saw people looking down on their phones all the time, shut off from the rest of the world. Their focus was entirely on the screen in front of their eyes. It was the complete opposite from the creed of the Lionhearts, which promoted discipline, focus, and hardships. So he didn't even attempt to ask the Reborn Company about supplying Trilla with the smartphones. "Did they not trust me with this phone?" Trilla asked, a little bit hurt. "My brother was a horrible piece of human being. He treats his employees like they were pieces of trash that could be discarded. Did they think I was worse than him?" Caliburn shook his head. "Earl stole his phones." "Then why?" The Lionheart patriarch was silent for a few seconds before taking a big breath. "If I am going to be honest, Miss Trilla, I agree with your brother." "Earl. No, Poiger." This made Trilla raise her eyebrows. Piotr was another one of her siblings, fifth in line to the succession throne of the Oscorp conglomerate. He was in charge of the military branch of the conglomerate, which meant that he had the strongest magnetic presence amongst every single other heir. "I believe that this phone is not going to be important in our succession fight. Yes, it has proven an invaluable tool in scouting, but magnetics can do the same. Even better, in fact. And if you give me more resources, I can grow your own scouting and espionage army that won't need those strange technologies." Once she heard this, Trilla couldn't help but sigh and shake her head. "I can't fault you for thinking of the phone being a military asset," she said, "but I believe that this phone has some kind of other use. My business intuition is telling me that I should go for it before everyone else." Trilla was never that adept in thinking about military strategies, and she didn't care. After all, inheriting the Oscorp throne didn't just require a military might, it also required a cunning business acumen. She wouldn't inherit the throne if she just killed every single one of her competition. Yes, she was cold-blooded when thinking about Earl's death, but that was only because he deserved it. When she arrived here in search for him, she wasn't even going to do anything to him. She was just going to give him a warning. Who would have thought he was so paranoid that he would instead plunge through into the chasm in order to avoid her? He must have thought that she would kill him. After all, that's what Earl would have done. He already killed one of his brothers once he won. So yes, she didn't care that Earl plunged to his death. But unlike most of her siblings and most of the upper echelon society, she believed that the strange technology that Earl used could become useful in other aspects. For example, if the rumors were to be believed, it could be used to communicate through large distances. And it didn't need any kind of magic or ability power, meaning even normal people could use it for themselves. This meant that it would be extremely useful for business. Added in with the automobiles, then she was confident that she could increase their production and income by at least 20%. "Trust me on this, Miss Trilla," said Caliburn, "we will not need those phones." Despite her intuition, Trilla couldn't help but nod. Caliburn was her father's longtime friend. She had no other choice but to respect his intuition as well. He had a well of knowledge that allowed him to live this long to make the Lionheart name become a household name. But she also believed that he was a bygone of a past era. He believed too much in military might, so much so that he was completely oblivious to other aspects of the world. Unfortunately, his kind of thinking was mirrored by most of the people in the conglomerate. They were old people stuck in their old ways. "I will be returning to the Oscorp estate to report about Earl's sudden passing," she said to Caliburn. The Lionheart patriarch nodded before exiting her camp. "What do we do now, patriarch?" asked one of his soldiers. "We'll fetch Arthur and the young Uns," Caliburn replied. "Then we go back to the upper echelon society. We need to start their training so that Trill will have the army she needs." So they continued their journey back to the nation of Reborn. It's not even a day later that they were suddenly intersected by a lone automobile containing Arthur. This, of course, surprised Caliburn. "My grandson, what are you doing here, and where are your younger cousins?" Immediately, they thought something wrong had happened, but after seeing that look on Arthur's face, they realized that something else had happened. "Grandfather, you won't believe what I just witnessed back there," Arthur said with excitement. They. Michael was very happy with how things were going during these past few days. The electrical grid had continued on without much problems, delivering electricity to impoverished territories and giving them comfort and luxury. They were even given some electrical appliances, one of which was a television set. This was another one of his projects that he was quick to make. After all, it was just a bigger phone with a bigger screen. Truthfully, he wasn't the one who thought of this first. It was the Blue Mankeys who suggested it to him. After all, they wanted to have something to project their movies onto. Yes, Reborn had cinemas in the nation. It even had giant screens on the buildings to project some projects and videos. But that was only limited to the nation of Reborn. Their other allies were still in the dark about the entertainment business. So the Blue Mankeys then asked Michael to create the television. That's actually one of the reasons why they created the movie, King Zion. It was supposed to be the debut movie for the television, which was going to play at the very same time that they plugged it in. Michael eventually relented on their request, so he created a blueprint on creating the television sets. Now, they didn't have the capacity to create another TV factory, but it was enough for them to create a few thousands of units. Each one will be delivered to each house in the Rebornian territory outside the parched lands. Now they would be able to watch Rebornian entertainment as if they were in the nation itself. The Blue Mankeys were quick to start new movies and projects, some of which even involved some of his closest allies. From what he heard, they were even able to get Shayna and Cassell to take part in some projects. As to what, he didn't know. Michael himself was asked to be in some. He quickly declined. He found it awkward to look at himself on a screen. He made the excuse of having a lot of things to worry about. But in truth, there was not much he had to think about. Thankfully, his fight with Earl didn't lead to much trouble. The conglomerate didn't ask for any compensation for Earl's defeat. He didn't even think they knew. They probably didn't even care about it. And so they continued on with their everyday process, thinking that all would go well. However, the Shadow Orcs then gave him a report. "BU-22, sir, we've seen a lot of phones being taken from our citizens, and it's not from any humans, it's from the demi-humans." Chapter 1253, Wanting Phones. The nation of Reborn experienced a great upheaval at the very moment that the television system was revealed to the general public. It seemed that the blue mankeys were correct. Entertainment was what this nation needed in this current time. The television shows produced were the ones normal TVs used to show back in Michael's previous life. Things like the weather, the news, and even a travel vlog detailing the different territories of Reborn and how to get there. People loved it. It gave people something to talk about. Hey, did you hear about the weather today? They said it's going to rain. Did you see what happened in Angora City? I heard that someone was able to awaken with an S-class talent. They'll be in Miss Cassell's entourage soon. I didn't know that the Monstera village is part of the Reborn company now. I'd like to visit it soon. I just hope that the railways will be connected there. Added into the fact that people could talk to each other in the Reborn social media app, the discourse between citizens was at an all-time high. Of course, Michael was not a stranger to the bad parts of having a phone. He knew that people may get addicted into staring at their screens for 12 hours a day. He knew that there was a possibility for bad things to spread due to the interconnectivity of the internet. However, he believed that the good outweighed the bad. He believed that it was for the good of society if two people who would never normally be able to talk to each other would get to interact in the internet with a single click of a button. It allowed for the possibility of friendship, for connection, for relationships. There were far too many things that social media was good for that it completely outweighed the bad stuff. Of course, he was going to do his best in order to mitigate those negatives. Thankfully, ChatJK6 could easily filter through the different data being sent through the internet and be able to discern whether it was violating the rules of the nation or not. She was the sieve, making sure only the good and pure parts of the internet were making it through. In these early days of the phone, that wouldn't be much of a problem, but he was anticipating the future. Once everyone in the entire world had access to a phone and the internet, there were invariably going to be some negatives filtering through. But for now, though, it was the honeymoon phase for the internet and the phone. Speaking of which, seems to be a hot topic for thieves for the current moment. Demi-humans are stealing phones, Michael asked the orc chieftains. Naruto and Sasuke both nodded. Ra-ta-ta, they've been posing as citizens to infiltrate our nation and bolt as soon as they get their hands on a few phones. The nation of Reborn was the only place in the royal continent that welcomed the demi-humans wholeheartedly. Most of the citizens in the nation were demi-humans, so it was easy for those thieves to get past their system. Are they part of some upper echelon company? He asked. The orc chieftains shook their heads. Bu-22, we've sent one of our elite penumbras to follow the thieves, and they found out where they're staying, the chasm. This was surprising for Michael. The chasm, you mean the one? Yeah. He pointed to the 3D topographical map in the middle of the room. Right now, the chasm separating New Sparta from the rest of the continent was colored orange, meaning they were a territory that was neither a friend or foe to the Reborn company. There was a small circle with an arrow pointing to the darkness of the chasm. A picture of a red monkey was inside that circle, showing its inhabitants. The red monkeys, they're stealing our phones. Michael didn't know how they even knew about the appearance of the phones, but it seemed that they were inclined to get more for themselves. He didn't know if that was a good or bad thing. They stole those phones from our furthest allies in the north, explained Naruto. We do not think that they knew they stole from us, they just wanted to steal the phones. Meaning it was more likely for the demi-humans to be interested in the phone itself as the reason for the theft, rather than a devious intent to fight against Reborn. Should we retrieve our unit's boss? Michael thought for a second, and in the end he chose not to retrieve the stolen phones. After all, this could be the way for them to be invited into the chasm. If the demi-humans there were to see the nation of Reborn through the pictures and videos in the social media app there, then they may be more inclined to visit the parched lands. This was great. Michael had been thinking of a way to start a conversation with the demi-humans there but never found something that would work. From what he knew, those demi-humans hated anyone intruding into their space, no matter the reason. So even when he sent friendly messengers there, they always rejected it. But now, Michael could infiltrate their forces from the inside. He'll let them see the beauty of Reborn, and then soon, they'll be the one wanting to be invited into Reborn. And so he made a decision. Once the phone factory is finished, I'll send some units to the outskirts of our territory. Make sure to lessen the defenses there so that the demi-humans would be more inclined to steal the phones. The shadow orcs nodded, before going off on their own ways. Meanwhile, Michael oversaw the construction of the new phone factory. Nothing special in its design, unlike the Mobius automobile factory, just something that was serviceable. After all, it would be constructed in the nation of Reborn, meaning they didn't have to worry about defenses as much as the Mobius factory. And so, about a day later, the factory was finished. Chapter 1254, Factory for Phones. The phone factory was overseen by the dwarves, making sure that the facilities there were made for them. Since they had a smaller stature than most, the factory lines were made appropriately smaller. Of course, since they also worked with higher temperatures, the machines were made to withstand those temperatures. Their primary work for the everyday process was to create the unity power source en masse. This would be the very thing that would dictate the daily production of phones. They could only make as much as the power sources. Thankfully, Michael awakened about 1,000 dwarves, and if they worked on a schedule, they could make about 100,000 power sources every single day. This meant that they could produce 700,000 phones a week. With this kind of production, they'd definitely be able to sate the demand for the phones amongst their citizens. The nation of Reborn would experience a great flurry of more phone users. Meanwhile, their allies in the outskirts of their territory would also be able to purchase their own phones without problem. Now, normally the price of a phone wasn't attainable for most people. However, the citizens of Reborn were not like the rest. They were basically as rich as the upper echelon society, probably even more. Thanks to the money they were getting from all their products, including the automobiles, Michael was able to give tremendously exorbitant salaries to his employees. Every single one of them could afford to buy an automobile and a phone if they wanted to. And as for their new allies in the north, they would need a few more time being allies before they were added into the flourishing economy of Reborn. Thankfully for them, Michael added in another loan system, making it so that they didn't have to pay the whole thing in one go. This was how the phone started to become prevalent in the territory of Reborn. Meanwhile, back in the Queen's region on the border of the chasm, Caliburn Lionheart and the other soldiers of his family were about to return to the nation of Reborn to fetch their younger members. And before they could, they were suddenly intercepted by none other than Arthur Lionheart. "Grandfather, you have to take a look at what happened in the nation of Reborn." His tone was full of excitement and vigor, unlike anything Caliburn had ever seen from his protégé grandson. "What is it?" he asked. It didn't take long before Arthur explained the sudden awakening of their younger cousins. "Impossible. That's just not true. How could that be? It defies all laws of physics." All the Lionheart magnetics couldn't help but degrade Arthur's words as nothing more than fiction. After all, how were they supposed to believe that their younger family members had already awakened their divas? They hadn't even trained. They hadn't earned their scars. They needed about a year more of growing before they could even start that grueling training session. And yet, Arthur was telling them that they awakened their divas not through warfare, not through bloodshed, and not through near-death experiences, but through this thing called a roller coaster. That was just not possible. They believed that nothing could stimulate a magnetic's heart other than a harsh and bloodied training. Even Arthur, who was hailed to be one of the fastest magnetics in the Lionheart history, could only awaken his diva about a week after his training with the Order of the Heavenly Knights. This would mean that his younger cousins were much more talented than Arthur, more talented than all of them, including their patriarch in fact. But they knew their younger cousins. They definitely didn't exhibit that kind of talent early on, and it wasn't just one or two of them, it was all of them. The probability that all of them had a hidden latent talent was basically non-existent. So they could only say that Arthur's words were nonsense. Arthur looked towards his grandfather. His words were the only thing that mattered. Caliburn saw that genuine look on Arthur's face. He believed that his grandson was telling the truth. He was telling him what he saw. But it was very much possible that what he saw was not the truth. Perhaps it was an illusion, a nascent influence someone put on him. Caliburn used his own nascent influence to search through Arthur's body for any signs of tampering. Thankfully, he didn't see anything. Is he telling the truth? Caliburn couldn't help but ask himself. In the end, Caliburn decided to check it out for himself. We shall check, he said. And so, along with Arthur, they made their way back to the nation of Reborn. About a third of the way there, they suddenly heard a screech from above them. They looked up and saw an eagle carrying a message on his talons. They beckoned the eagle down, and it delivered the scroll it carried. Caliburn unfurled the message and read it by himself. Trilla has been commanded by his father. She is to take over Earl's responsibilities. Arthur didn't know much about what they were talking about. What is she to do, grandfather? She is to build a bridge, in the chasm, he said gravely. After saying this, the other Lionheart members all turned sullen. They knew that this was a hard task, a bloody one at that. Everyone knew that the chasm was inhibited by those demi-humans, and they deterred anyone who tried to make a bridge to cross the chasm. Of course, such a bridge would be very profitable, which was why it was such a contested spot, but even the other companies hadn't even tried to do it themselves. After all, it was too dangerous. Fighting with an unknown army in the chasm was like fighting without a light. They'd die in the dark. However, now Trilla was forced to do Earl's work. He was the one who was supposed to die doing that responsibility. Chapter 1255, Shocking Scenery. Throughout their journey back to the nation of Reborn, Caliburn was burdened by thoughts and responsibilities. He was allied to the Oscorp conglomerate. He has been best friends with its leader since they were children. So he knew that he should absolutely follow the words of the conglomerate and do as they said. However, he had also grown fondness for Trilla. He'd seen her grow up from a chubby little child into the competent woman she was now. And he couldn't help but think that her father was throwing her away by asking her to do this. Yes, every single conglomerate was planning on establishing a bridge in the chasm at one point or another, and the Oscorp conglomerate was simply trying to get ahead of the curve. But there was a reason that despite weeks after it occurred, people still had to skirt the edges of the chasm. There was no bridge because people couldn't build it, plain and simple. It required a tremendous undertaking even without considering the demi-humans protecting and conserving it from being changed. So he couldn't help but feel as if Trilla was just given a death sentence. There was no way she was going to complete this project. It was so hopeless that they initially gave it to Earl Oscorp, who the conglomerate was already trying to get rid of. And Earl, to his credit, tried his best to do it. He organized all of the mineshafts and mining estates in their conglomerate in order to pool their resources to make this project possible. But even then, he failed, and he was supposed to be good at this. Trilla was no slouch. She was an intelligent woman, but her expertise lay in business, not construction. She could sell a bridge in a flat plain, but she'd have trouble building one. And now, she was tasked with building the most grand and most important bridge in history. Caliburn shook his head. These kinds of thoughts distracted him enough that they finally reached the nation of Reborn without him even noticing it. "Come on," Arthur said excitedly, "you'll have to see their roller coaster." Caliburn and the other Lionhearts didn't mirror his excitement. They were wary. They were still doubtful about the veracity of his claims that Reborn had found the secret to stimulating a God-forged heart. And as they traveled to westward towards the neighboring territory containing the Cthulhu roller coaster, Caliburn spotted something in the distance. A new building made out of steel and concrete. Large chimneys on its roof blew out white smoke to the clouds, which seemed to absorb the fumes hungrily. "I didn't see that before," he said. Caliburn's attention was forced away from the new phone factory by Arthur's prodding. They exited out of their carriage, seeing the Leviathan monster bearing down on them from above. "Lionhearts," Arthur said as he presented his younger cousins forward, "meet our newest addition to the army." The Lionheart soldiers, the veterans, the seniors all scrutinized their younger family members with great seriousness. They wanted to see if they were hurt in any way. They flinched back when they felt ability power threads fraying out of their younger family members. "Maugenitis," they all screamed out in surprise. How is this possible? Are you sure this is true? The younger Lionhearts all showed prideful looks on their faces. They all looked at each other and nodded. And with practiced movements, they all summoned their divas one by one, showing off the signature power of the Lionhearts. Mighty, divine, and powerful figures emerged out of white mist from their heads, each holding swords of various kinds. This was the evidence that truly made the senior Lionhearts realize that they'd been wrong. This was true, genuine. There was no way that those divas would appear if it were. Grandfather, do you see? Arthur's words were cut off when he saw that the only Lionheart who wasn't paying any attention towards the younger Magnetics was Caliburn. Their grandfather's attention was far away from them, off into the distance to the left. There was a look of incredulity in Caliburn's face, as if he was both doubtful and shocked at the same time. Arthur had no choice but to follow his gaze, and there he saw in the distance a small golden light flittering about around a short and stocky human. No, wait. Upon closer inspection, that golden light, that wasn't a firefly. It was a fairy. They had their signature golden glow emanating out of their skin, their translucent and beautiful wings, as well as the fairy powder trailing them as they flew in the air. There was no mistaking it, that was a fairy. And they weren't alone. Caliburn saw about 100 more of those golden lights flying about in the roller coaster, some flying above the humans, some just lazily lounging on the railing. But perhaps that wasn't the most surprising part. After all, one of the fairies was talking with a dwarf. Yes, those elusive, xenophobic, and lonesome dwarves, famed for their incredible craftsmanship and their dislike for going out of their territory. Somehow, two of the most elusive species in history were interacting right here, in front of about 1,000 people altogether. And no one was minding them. It was as if it was normal. The fact that Caliburn could see the fairies meant that even normal humans could see them as well. Those fairies could easily erase themselves from everyone's perception if they wanted to. But they didn't. They were here to be seen in all their mythical glory, and no one was minding them. It was at this point that he truly realized that he knew nothing about the Reborn company, and at the same time, a lot of things made sense. So that's how they built all of this. We need their help, Caliburn said to himself. They're the only ones who can, but the only other problem will be competition against the other companies. We'll need more than an army. Grandfather. It was only at this point that Caliburn turned his attention forwards, towards his newly minted magnetic grandchildren. Home. Info. Saved. Library. Chapter 1256, Caliburn's Request. Caliburn and the Lionhearts stormed back into the Rebornian headquarters in the middle of their nation. It was very reminiscent of their first visit here, except there was more urgency in their movements, more excitement. Back then, they only wanted to meet with their leader because they wanted to relay Oscorp's message to the Reborn company at the fastest time possible. But now they were here for a completely different reason. Michael sat in his seat and faced Caliburn, the patriarch of the Lionhearts. What brings you back? Michael asked with a smile. Of course, he had an inkling as to why. The Shadow Orcs already informed him about the incident where the Lionheart patriarch screamed to the top of his lungs back in the roller coaster area. You were deceiving us, Caliburn said. Michael's eyebrows raised. The Reborn company is not a lower echelon company. You're a conglomerate in waiting. This was very much surprising to hear, especially from Caliburn. After all, the Lionheart patriarch was known to be very much involved with the Oscorp conglomerate. They have been allied since long ago. He saw how the Oscorp company turned from a middling organization to now the second most powerful business in the world. So when he said that Reborn had the potential of being a conglomerate, one shouldn't take that as a light compliment. I've always thought that your technologies, while useful, will not ultimately help you cross the threshold to becoming an upper echelon company. But I was wrong. My grandsons, they are not the most talented of heirs, but they are young. However, your roller coaster was able to bring out their latent talent. Caliburn snapped his fingers. Like that. A few seconds of silence reigned in the meeting room. Michael neither confirmed nor denied anything. What you have here, you have built yourself your own world, one that doesn't have to answer to other companies. Once you enter into the upper echelons, you'll learn that despite there being a lot of competition, the truth is that business is built on relationships. Companies borrow each other's resources, they buy services, they create alliances. If you wanted to build a bridge, you'd need to buy resources from your fellow companies. Even something as basic as food needs to be exported or imported. No one can fully supply themselves except for the conglomerates, and you. Caliburn rubbed his fingers. You have built a utopia here in the desert where most have deemed worthless. You are able to sustain yourselves and even grow tremendously all on your own. Michael scratched his nose, feeling a little bit embarrassed from the flurry of compliments. If he were going to be honest, most of these were done by his friends and allies. All he did was organize most of them to work together. I have good support, he said. You have the fairies and the dwarves, Caliburn replied. I see it now, even the most elusive species are your allies. I don't know how you were able to do it, but you are able to become as solid as a conglomerate. No weaknesses. It was at this point that another few seconds of silence passed. The Lionheart patriarch was nervously rubbing his hands together as if he was still deep in thought. After all, this decision should not be taken lightly. It would fundamentally change everything about their family, perhaps permanently. It would also echo off into the upper echelon society with large waves. This could either turn good or turn for the worse. Their family could go into ruin. And as the patriarch, Caliburn was supposed to never consider anything that could even result in his family's demise. However, something was also telling him that the reborn company was something they'd never seen before. They were a cub growing into a lion, and if they don't curry favor with them now, then they'll simply get eaten in the future. After thinking about it some more, Caliburn finally made his decision. Michael, leader of the reborn company, heed my request. Let the Lionheart family serve you. This was surprising. Michael had to lean forward so that he could truly hear the old man's words. Wait, I thought that the Oscorp conglomerate had you guys on retainer. That is true, Caliburn replied. They pay us tremendous amounts of money so that we can offer our services to them. We give them our soldiers, but now I'm offering them to you. And before Michael could even say anything, Caliburn added something more. I'm not just going to offer you my soldiers, my family, but I'm also going to offer you my expertise. My family has a history of becoming the heavenly swordsman of a generation, you know that, correct? Well, that is through rigorous training that we accumulated throughout our illustrious history. I am now offering that to you. I noticed that you have talented soldiers, magnetics with pure talent emanating off of their very bones, but they're crude, they're unpolished. I think that with my help I can turn them into truly monstrous soldiers that will help you deter any kind of trouble that comes your way in the future. And trust me, it will come. Once people find out more about your nation, the more they'll feel the competition. Michael stood in silence for a good minute, considering. After all, this was a very good opportunity for them. In fact, it was too good. He was essentially stealing an entire army from the Oscorp conglomerate, which was good and bad at the same time. What would the Oscorps think? Caliburn nodded. Yes, they will not take kindly to this. However, they are currently undergoing a tremendous upheaval. The succession is creating a lot of chaos and competition within themselves. And I think that this will be your chance. I believe that if you help me and help an ally from the conglomerate, you can survive against Oscorp and maybe even win against them. Michael tilted his head. Ally. Yes, Caliburn said, I will introduce you to a good friend. Chapter 1257, Lionheart Alliance. Trilla, unlike most of her siblings who only want to inherit the Oscorp conglomerate even if it means shedding a lot of blood, she only wants to keep her company afloat. At first, Michael was a bit hesitant in allying himself with an Oscorp. Perhaps he'd been thinking of her like Earl, but he didn't have a good impression with any of the Oscorp inheritors as of now. However, after meeting Caliburn and the other Lionhearts, he could immediately see that they weren't horrible people. Their hearts were only filled with one thing, swords. They didn't have any greed for anything else. They were honorable people, and once this agreement between them becomes solid, then Michael would be able to confidently think of the Lionhearts as his allies. They wouldn't tarnish their honor by doing something that would hurt the reborn company. So, Caliburn endorsing Trilla must have been a truly good idea for Michael. In truth, Caliburn added, she has heard of your smartphone, and shamefully I tried to dissuade her from trying to buy those phones from you. Michael's eyebrows raised. Why did she want to buy the phones? Was it to win against her other siblings like Earl? Will blood be spilled because of those phones again? She believes about the business potential of those phones. She said that it had a lot of uses in agriculture, trade, and other such sectors of everyday life. I told her that, yes, it may be good for business, but it will not be an ultimate solution to deal with her siblings. Trilla only wants to grow her business. Unfortunately, her stature as an heir puts her directly in the sights of her other siblings. They will try to eliminate her one way or another, even if she tries to convince them that she wouldn't want to fight them over it. Michael wouldn't truly get a good idea about Trilla until he met her personally, but from Caliburn's words, it seemed that she was of a similar mind with his. She was a businessman through and through. Okay, I'll meet with her, he said. Caliburn's countenance glowed. Splendid, I will write a letter to her as soon as possible. But before he left, Michael had a question for him. Why are you willing to separate from the Oscorp company so easily? Isn't their leader your closest friend? Caliburn's step slowed, his head bent down, and with a sigh he turned and faced Michael. When we were kids, we were inseparable, but as we grew and our responsibilities grew beyond ourselves, we've changed. I have become more family-oriented, and he became more company-oriented. All it matters to him now is to turn the Oscorp conglomerate into the most successful company in the entire world. It doesn't matter if they're already the second biggest organization in the Golden Rankings. And that was acceptable, but lately things have turned from bad to worse. He's even hungrier. When I asked him why, he told me that the Vanderbilts are weakening. Is growing old and he doesn't have any viable heirs to uphold their current monopoly over the world. So he feels that this is his only chance to overtake his old rival. He wants it. He still wants to stand at the top, even if it means sacrificing his heirs to do so. If just one of his children shows themselves to be capable of defeating the other heirs, then they would have the potential to lead the Oscorp conglomerate to that coveted first rank. He's essentially weeding out his heirs, making them all polish each other, until one comes out on top. Caliburn's words turned emotional at those last parts. He couldn't help but look back at his family members. Yes, Caliburn was harsh with his family, making them go through the hardships of training, but he knew that it was needed if they were going to survive this cruel world. But the Oscorps didn't need to do that. They already stood at the top of the world. They were essentially sacrificing their family members simply for the chance to overtake one other family. I tried to tell him my concerns. He cast me out saying I didn't understand it, but I understood then and there. He has changed, and I can no longer support him and his company like before. I believe he'll eventually lead everyone he cares for to ruin. I would have pulled out our entire family at that instant, but then I remembered Trilla. She's the only shining hope for that family. She's the one who hasn't been corrupted by their greed. So for old time's sake, I swore to myself that I'll make sure Trilla survives this succession before I completely leave their company. Caliburn turned to Michael. Then I saw your company, and thank the heavens I did. Hearing this, Michael became a bit more sympathetic to Caliburn's actions. I shall write a letter to my armies back in the Oscorp estate. I'll have my 1st to 3rd battalions retreat and meet up here in the parched lands. I would have liked to pull out our entire army, but unfortunately the conglomerates would find that suspicious and stop our moves at an instant. So for now, this would suffice. Michael would have liked that too. Having 3 battalions of superior swordsmen would definitely bolster their military might even more. Una first solidified their alliance by writing it in a contract for each party. Caliburn and Michael clasped each other's forearms to signify their new cooperation. In exchange for their help, Michael would also help the Lionheart family become stronger. This includes arming them with weapons and also helping them advance through their cultivation through the roller coasters. It was kind of funny seeing their reactions. Caliburn, Arthur, and the rest of the Lionhearts were stunned into silence when they saw the dwarven forge where their new mithril artifacts were taken for measurement. MITHRIL, you're giving US full MITHRIL armor. Chapter 1258, Army Building. The Lionhearts all thought that allying themselves with the Reborn Company was worth it simply for the opportunity to use the Cthulhu roller coaster at any time they wanted. That would have been enough. But then they learned that Reborn was allied with the dwarves. Okay, great. That meant that they would also supply them with full Damascus steel armor. But it turned out that they weren't just given Damascus steel, they were given mithril artifacts. These weren't just mithril artifacts scavenged from history, which was usually filled with cracks, moss, or rust. These were newly built and forged mithril artifacts, and they were specifically built for them. The dwarves took their measurement and began working on it on the very same day. Holy, Caliburn shook his head. It seemed that his words earlier had already been proven correct. Thank the heavens that he met the Reborn Company. Their alliance was already paying dividends for the Lionhearts. Not only would they find a reliable way to cultivate without risking their lives, they were also provided with the strongest materials in the world. The method to make these was thought to have been extinct. It's good for both of us, said Caliburn. What did you mean? Had I known you were capable of arming your soldiers with mithril, I would have offered to train your soldiers for free. It's such a complete waste to have your soldiers use these magnificent pieces of weapon while being untrained. It would have physically hurt me to see that, Caliburn said. True enough, they didn't have an actual army in Reborn. They had officers like the Dragonborns or the Shadow Orcs. They even had a police force with the Centaurs. But they didn't have an army. So Caliburn was quick to take action. He wanted to send his letter to his family back in the upper echelons. Of course, Michael offered to use the Shadow Orcs to ensure speed and security. And this meant that he had to introduce Caliburn to the Shadows of Reborn. BU-22, saluted one of the elite penumbras as he kneeled towards Caliburn and Michael. This orc. Caliburn's eyes washed over the demi-human's entire being, seeing the shadows seething at his skin. The Lionheart Patriarch couldn't help but be impressed. Even seeing him up close, he couldn't even sense the orc's presence. No wonder not a lot of people know about Reborn back in the upper echelons, he said. It seems that you have no problem with espionage with these orcs under your command. Caliburn offered the orc a chance to change his weapon of choice from a dagger to a sword, but the orc refused, saying that a sword was too flashy for assassinations. Eventually, the elite penumbra disappeared into the shadows to deliver the letter. Finally, Caliburn had the chance to organize Reborn's army. First he went to Cassell and Shayna. No offense, he said to both, but I found it really lucky that you all haven't been destroyed by now. In Caliburn's eyes, an organization without a sufficient army wouldn't ever stand a chance against any of the other upper echelons. And with Reborn being so appetizing to the other companies, it was a wonder that they hadn't been attacked by multiple upper echelons by now. We make do, Shayna said. We deter any kinds of attack with our strength. Caliburn wanted to laugh at that, wondering how they had the confidence to say that without any sufficient army. But then he noticed the hidden power emanating from Shayna. His eyes narrowed, then he noticed the discrepancy. This woman wasn't a human at all. You. Michael rubbed his hair. Caliburn, this is Shayna. Caliburn's eyes widened. Shayna, you mean the demi-human who won the archery competition. In all honesty, he wanted to meet the Dragonborns first. He thought that they were the perfect generals for the army. But he didn't expect to meet one of the Dragonborns here, acting as a secretary. But you look human. Caliburn remembered that moment. Ever since she won that competition, her face had been imprinted into the minds of every single person in the Colosseum. So he was sure that she didn't look human at all. Michael had to explain that she experienced an evolution. It was at this point that Caliburn's head ached. I don't think it's good for my mentality if I keep on thinking of your company as normal. Caliburn had to shake his head out of his own stupor. Eventually, he began to accept that Shayna, that fearsome archer, was now a human. I would like to know about your military might, Caliburn said. I have to know how many you can deploy at a single moment, how many more we can conscript, and how many are in reserves. Caliburn treated this as a real army. He wanted to build the first true system in Reborn, one with generals, battalions, and platoons. And Shayna, being the secretary, was quick to give him the numbers. It took about an hour for Caliburn to fully understand Reborn's power. I see, he said. It looks like you truly don't have any army that you can use. They hadn't even recruited anyone. Most of their citizens were used for production or services, which was probably what made their business grow so much. But in these coming days, I suggest that you start preparing for battles. With magic gone, your automobiles will be even more wanted in the coming days. This meant that they would be invaded, or in the worst case, be started a war. Of course, Michael was confident that they could easily defeat anyone they come across. Him and the Dragonborns were plenty powerful enough to deter any of their competition. However, they were only a few handful. They all couldn't be everywhere all at once. Which meant that Caliburn was right. They needed a true army, one that could be stationed in their territory, especially since it was growing still. Chapter 1259, Battalion. Caliburn Lionheart became the first army instructor of Reborn. He and the fellow Lionhearts started a boot camp, one where all the talented youngsters from Reborn were trained in order for them to become accustomed to an army lifestyle. Yes, Rebornians were already powerful enough and didn't need that much experience in order to advance through their cultivation levels, but that didn't mean that they were ready to become an army. They might be okay to fight one-on-one, but fighting together against an army was a totally different beast altogether. So, Caliburn started the boot camp. About 50,000 capable men and women volunteered for this project, all of whom were personally vetted by Michael as people who had talent in fighting in an army. Caliburn would teach them how to organize themselves into battalions, into groups, and into teams and other such denominations. They would show them how to properly act through the chain of command. Then after that, they would start training them properly. This would start with a simple jog every day through the circumference of the nation, and it would escalate to a full-blown marathon that would require the recruits to trudge through mud, crawling, in order to avoid barbed wires above them. Michael watched with interest. How goes our new army? Caliburn and Michael both looked down at the plain area below the cliffside, watching as thousands of recruits went through the different obstacle courses. They can't be called an army yet, Caliburn answered. Right now, we're just training their physicality. Usually, most organizations would have already had some kind of training regimen like this in place, but it seemed that life in Reborn had been too good. But it doesn't matter, your army's talent is astounding. Although this is the first time they've had this training, they're improving at an immaculate rate. I almost can't believe it. Michael was not surprised. Most of the talents they had were in the B class to S class. Of course, they were going to be fast learners. In my estimation, they'll be done with this kind of training by the end of the week, Caliburn said. Are you going to train them how to fight next? The Lionheart Patriarch shook his head. Not yet, we'll start arranging them into their respective battalions first, and unfortunately I'll only be able to handle the swordsman division of your army. According to Caliburn, a good army had talents from all the different disciplines of weapons. Swords were used for hand-to-hand combat, axes were used for sieges, archers were used for defense, etc. Of course, the nation of Reborn had talented people that could wield those weapons. Unfortunately, they had no teacher. Caliburn and the Lionhearts specialized in swordsmanship. It would be a disservice for them to try and train the archers or the spearholders of Reborn. We'll just teach them how to act as a group and how to organize themselves. But as for teaching them how to actually use their weapons best, that is not something we can do, Caliburn said. It was a little bit of a disappointment, but Michael understood it. Anyway, there were still about 10,000 recruits who could wield the sword, meaning they could learn the famous Lionheart Flame of Eternity swordsmanship. This style was their bread and butter. It was the very reason as to how 3 of their ancestors achieved the coveted Heavenly Knight title. And now they were going to teach this swordsmanship to the Rebornians. Michael was very much excited to see this for himself. So about a week later, once the boot camp was done, Caliburn had the swordsmen recruit gather into one group. "You have all proven yourselves to be capable of holding a sword, but that does not mean you can wield it," Caliburn said. And if Caliburn was going to be honest, this kind of training was beneath him. He was the patriarch. This should be done by the youngsters, especially since they were teaching novice swordsmen. However, he just couldn't help but find a chance to use his new sword. He unsheathed his weapon, its metallic glint glistening from the sun rays above. This was his newly created mithril artifact done by the dwarves. Somehow, they were able to accommodate every single design that he wanted. It even included the Lionheart emblem on its hilt. "This is the first style of the Flame of Eternity," he said as he raised his sword to the heavens before waving it in a circle around him. Flames erupted from the tip of the sword, creating a circle of fire around Caliburn. What's amazing about this was that he didn't use his diva at all. There was no trace of ability power with that move. It was simply through the sword style itself that this fire was created. "Anything that comes towards me will be torn asunder," Caliburn said. The recruits believed it. Even being near him made their hair stand on end, fearing that they'd get burned into cinders. Caliburn moved. He waved his sword in accordance to his feet, sweeping into an arc towards the northeast. Flames formed into a spear head, elongating like a snake ready to pounce. "Second style," Caliburn said, "I will pierce anything that comes in front of me." Then he moved again, retracting his sword back towards his chest in a defensive manner. The flame disappeared along with Caliburn's entire body. He reappeared behind the recruits, earning him their applause and awe. These are the basic moves for the Flame of Eternity sword style. If you heed your instructor's words carefully, then someday you may be able to replicate what I've done here, he said, sheathing his sword. Michael saw flames of excitement burn into the recruits' eyes. Even he himself couldn't help but anticipate the time when all 10,000 recruits summoned flames out of their swords. The senior Lionheart members then separated the recruits into smaller groups, teaching them individually. Soon, the open space became a training ground as men and women waved their swords around, trying to imitate the moves they saw before. None were able to emit even a single spark of fire. Caliburn returned to Michael's side. "Michael, I have heard that you have an extremely talented swordsman in your midst. Where is he?" Chapter 1260, Flame of Eternity. In truth, Caliburn had been searching the recruits for the infamous Jakku, the Dragonborn who was able to best his most talented grandson during the feast in New Sparta. He wanted to see the very man who had caught the eye of Eldia, the heavenly swordmistress. What made him so special that she would choose him instead of Arthur, who was said to be the most talented swordsman in the world since he was a little child? Yes, he'd heard about the incident at the summit. Jakku had the power of the ancient roar, which was astounding, but hardly a reason to think that he was a better swordsman than Arthur. Jakku may be more powerful, but in a matter of raw skill and talent in the sword, Arthur should have been able to beat him quite easily. "Is he currently undergoing training?" Caliburn asked. Michael scratched his head awkwardly. "You could say that." He didn't want to admit that Jakku was currently lounging in his bed. The Dragonborn hadn't left his room at all ever since that television was installed into his room. Well, that could count as training, right? After all, Jakku's ability power was based on his laziness. Perhaps he was just charging up all of his lightning powers in order to burst it all out at an appropriate time. Of course, that was just Michael's optimistic view of things, but in all probability, Jakku was just probably too lazy to do anything. 3 days passed and the recruits continued their training. Many had made great strides, being able to replicate the moveset for the swordstyle without any prompt. Those who had greater talent were able to produce flames on their swords. Although it was only a wisp and they weren't able to fully wrap their blades in fire, they were still able to manifest it, which was quite surprising for the Lionhearts. After all, they thought it would take at least a month before anyone would be able to do that. Most of the Lionheart soldiers took a month to do it. Near the evening, Michael was prompted by the Shadow Orcs to enter into their headquarters. They had something to report. BU-22, boss, we have been keeping an eye on the chasm. Ra TATA, we've seen signs of other humans trying to break through into the chasm. They showed him a video footage taken from a shadow orc's point of view. Hidden in the dark crevices of the chasm wall, they were able to get a good view as an entire army of soldiers, human, charged into the descending stairs of the chasm in the hopes of deterring the demi-human society inside. They're attacking the demi-humans, but it looks like they're not going to win this. They were fighting in the demi-humans' territory. The chasm was dark and filled with treacherous roads and winding pathways that could easily lead people astray. Humans would need a lot of time to study that place before they could eventually try and journey through it safely. And that wasn't even taking into the fact that there would be demi-humans striking them from afar, which was happening right now. In Michael's opinion, this was going to be a lost cause. Just like with Earl's case, they were never going to beat the demi-humans. The best they could do was to retreat. However, it seemed that these people had no intention of retreating. Wait. Somehow, through grit, perseverance, and sheer numbers, the human army was able to deter the demi-humans from destroying their army. Their superior weapons and armors allowed for them to be bashed without taking too much damage. This would be the perfect time to advance, to take a little bit of space in order to fully explore the chasm. But they don't. Strangely enough, they had no intention of advancing. They were just at the very entrance of the chasm. They're not trying to advance, Michael realized. That's right, boss, said Naruto. It seems that they're just trying to make a distraction. The scene changed, and the lip of the chasm, he could see multiple people using their divas to life large crates of metal and wood. Through artisan magnetics, they were able to start a foundation for something. A bridge. They were trying to build a bridge. The army is just there as a distraction for the demi-humans. They don't want to advance because they know that they'll get outnumbered the further they go into their demi-human lair. They don't need to anyway. As long as they keep this place safe, their workers above can be assured to work without risking their lives. Michael couldn't help but compliment the humans for their tactics. Judging from this, it seemed that it would only be a matter of time before it worked. However, unfortunately for them, said Sasuke, they underestimated the demi-humans. The scene changed once again to the depths of the chasm. The once prim and tip-top shape army was now in tatters. They were bloodied and were decimated, with most of their forces lying dead on the ground or have fallen to the depths of the chasm. And the reason for all this was a small group of demi-humans. Red Mankeys, there were about 4 of them, all holding swords. These swords seemed to have been man-made. In fact, it was the same sword as the humans they were fighting. Meaning these Red Mankeys just stole this weapon from them. And with those swords, they were decimating the human forces with ease. With each of their swing, a powerful shockwave emanated from it, destroying the proud armors that those humans wore. They were able to kill off all the humans, said Naruto. And it wasn't long before the bridge they were trying to make was destroyed as well, and right now that company was forced to retreat back into their territory. As of now, no one is trying to build a bridge again, added Sasuke. Michael was in deep thought. Could Jaku have defeated those Red Mankeys? He didn't know. And that brings us to the end of this chapter. This is Jason audiobook. And I just want to give a huge thank you to every single one of you for staying all the way through. Whether you're listening to relax, to escape, or to dive deeper into these incredible worlds, your time and support truly mean everything. Every like, every comment, and every share helps this channel grow and allows more stories to come to life in audiobook form. You're not just listeners, you're part of this journey. If you have a web novel you'd love to hear turned into an audiobook, don't hesitate to send me a DM. I'm always looking for new adventures to bring to the channel, and your suggestions could be the next big story we dive into. And if you're enjoying the content and want to support even more, consider checking out the Patreon for exclusive early releases, bonus chapters, and behind-the-scenes content. Once again, thank you for being here. Until the next chapter, stay immersed, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next story.